Hi, Andrew Rowan here. I'm founder and director of GKTA Group, which is a link between the public and private sectors in Vietnam. I'm based in Hanoi, where I've been living for 2 years, and I lived in Ho Chi Minh City for a year before that. I'm here today talking to Startup Southeast Asia about my experiences in Vietnam, and also about the bright future that's ahead for Vietnam and folks who are interested in startups. Thank you.
So I've been spending more time investigating the Southeast Asian ecosystem from a startup perspective.
I just wanted to learn a little more about Vietnam and startups and the scene, the startup scene in Vietnam.
All right, yay! Everyone, thank you so much for making it here. I know, it's New York City. I'm sure you have 100 of other options that you can go to, but you guys are here, so we're really grateful. And before we start, I want to introduce the founding team of Startup Southeast Asia. So we have Carleen, who's going to tell us a bit more about Startup Southeast Asia.
Hi, I'm Carleen. So Teal, Carter, and I got the idea behind this last summer. We all have pretty deep roots in the startup community. Previously, I was working with different city governments to understand the role of entrepreneurship, startups, and technology in relationship to the local economy and thinking about the future. So I worked with New York City, London, Boston to map out their tech ecosystems and build that database. So we came together and we said, there's actually super weird. There's a ton of Asian entrepreneurs yet, you never see the spotlight on them in the media. This is kind of a reflection of a larger picture, not just in tech, but all over. So we wanted to bring light to what was happening here. And Teal can talk a little more about specifically Southeast Asia relationship. She has deep experience with startups in Asia.
Thank you.
Hey, my name is Teal Willingham. I'm part 3 of this group, and thank you guys for joining us this evening. So yeah, I'm originally from Hawaii, but I ended up working in Hong Kong and mainland China for quite some time, over 5 years. And I've been in New York for 4 years now, working at different startups. Most recently, I've joined the NYU Future Labs, which is the space that you guys are in currently. It is a public-private partnership between New York University and the New York City government. We're a nonprofit. We have, I think, about 20 companies in here right now, about 70 founders and all of their engineers. This space in particular is focused on big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. So every startup in here is focused on that. We don't work with students, we work with companies from the community. And that was the whole point behind sort of starting this incubator, which is actually the first in New York, was to kind of turn New York into an amazing startup hub and support founders and technologists here. So that kind of ties into why we're doing Startup Southeast Asia, because we want to do the same thing for our communities, which we have ties to and care about back at home. So thank you very much. And I also just want to say, as you mentioned already, but we have a very lovely sponsor, Chang here.
Yay, cheers!
I want to thank Chan, our attendees here, and Decha, who graciously provided it for us. So thank you guys very much.
And I also want to thank Teal and NYU for hosting us. This is an amazing space and has some amazing acoustic, I must say. And so, and I also want to thank Andrew, who will be sharing with us his experience this evening. So, let's get started. So, I don't know if you guys had the pleasure of meeting Andrew during, over like food and drinks. But Andrew, before we dive into Vietnam and startups, can you share with the audience your experience in the country and some of the cool projects that you worked on while you were there?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Andrew Rowan. I'm very happy to be here. I first went to Vietnam in 2011, and at the time it was for a smart home project. So I was actually working at a company here in New York, which is where I'm from, and I was integrating technology in physical spaces. So think of audio, lighting, video, shades, which you can control from your iPhone or iPad. So I went to Vietnam for about a month the first time, and I was absolutely thrilled to be there. And I noticed in particular the energy, the excitement, the electricity that was running through the streets in Saigon. And I thought, I have to move back. You know, I've got to go back one day. And so I did. In 2013, I had the opportunity to be a consultant on that project. And I was only supposed to be in Saigon for 3 months, but our local partners missed 5 deadlines. And so 3 months turned into a year. While I was there, I took the opportunity to speak to entrepreneurs, locals, foreigners, and also members from the diaspora who were in Saigon. And I asked them, how did you find your first customer? How do you deal with the bureaucracy? How do you deal with some of the laws that are applicable, even though you're not, let's say, in the US? And I got a variety of answers, some good, some honest. And I attempted to execute my own startup in 2013 after about 6 months of being on the ground. We were trying to localize a novel advertising platform. So think of if you play a mini game on your phone and you win, you had the opportunity to win a digital or physical prize. So it's a great way to push samples from fast-moving consumer goods brands. It failed ultimately due to co-founder friction. And then when the main project wrapped up, the smart home, I moved to Hanoi in 2014 because I was interested in the differences across Vietnam, especially between North and South. In 2013, I had spent my first Christmas in Hanoi, and it turned out to be more charming and pleasant than I was led to believe while I was living in Saigon. So it was a great experience, and I happened to move there. Once I got to Hanoi, I started working more with public sector programs, like the Finland-Vietnam Innovation Partnership Program. And that's a $12.2 million fund. It's co-funded by the governments of Finland and Vietnam. So on the Finnish side, it's the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. On the Vietnamese side, it's the Ministry of Science and Technology. And then I've also worked directly with the Ministry of Science and Technology around building relationships for startups outside of Vietnam. So building capacity for entrepreneurs, accelerating the growth of SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, inside and outside Vietnam, and relationship building as well. So I've been in Hanoi for 2 years and Saigon for 1 year. And I'm excited to be moving to Da Nang this year, which is almost directly in between both cities.
So that's a lot of things that you've had in 3 years. And if you guys don't know, Andrew is writing a book. And can you tell us what we can expect from the book? Will it be about startup experience? Will it be like an overview of the country? We're excited and we're curious.
Yeah, so it's my first book, and I have really been writing this book starting from 3 years ago, which was the first time that I ever wrote about Vietnam and published it. And this book, it's called Startup Vietnam, Innovation and Entrepreneurship in the Socialist Republic. It's really the book that I wish I had when I first got to Vietnam. And it's primarily geared to foreigners who might be interested in either starting something in Vietnam or investing in Vietnam. So really setting expectations for what they might encounter and hopefully reducing cultural miscommunications there. Because there is a pretty big, broad, there are some gaps, and it can be difficult to bridge them sometimes. So I'm about 80% done with the book. I've got about 130,000 words currently, which I'll cut to about 60,000 words. So I'm going to wrap up the manuscript. I'm on a mission to do so, and really excited to getting my first book out.
Okay, so we have some interesting facts facts about Vietnam in the event description. For the people that didn't get the chance to read it, and to the people who might be watching this on video, can you tell us a bit more about Vietnam, like an overview of the country, the economy, the ecosystem, and what makes it exciting? Like, why Vietnam?
Yeah, I think anyone who's ever been to Vietnam, so if you've been to Vietnam, can you raise your hand? So it looks like a pretty good sized portion of folks. That's great. I think the first thing you notice is the interest in entrepreneurship across the board. There's a shop at the ground level of almost every house in a major city. Folks there are hustling, in a good way. They're all trying to improve their lives somehow. That can take many different forms, but the spirit of entrepreneurship in Vietnam, I think, is something that is very hard to replicate elsewhere, that natural spirit that's there. On the macroeconomic side of Vietnam, the economic growth in Vietnam has been absolutely superb over the last 30 years. So it's been second only to China. And the economic projections going forward are very positive. So last year, the growth in economic growth in Vietnam was 6.21% GDP. The Economist projects that between 2017 and 2021, the economic growth rate on average will be 6.5%. And that doesn't include the Trans-Pacific Partnership impact, which everyone expected Vietnam to benefit greatly from, perhaps the most. So there are a lot of indicators which suggest a very bright future ahead for Vietnam. Working with young people there, you can see the optimism and really inspiration that drives them to jump into a startup culture. So I think the pieces are slowly coming into place for things to really take off in Vietnam. To give one statistic, Vietnam is in the top 10, it's in the top 10 for engineering output in the world. So there are 100,000 engineers who are produced in Vietnam every year, right? So that's an incredible advantage for what some folks might consider a small country, right? When you compare it to a continent-sized economy like China or like India. So I think there are several advantages like that which really give Vietnam a leg up when you compare it to other countries in the region and also in the world.
So what's the biggest industry right now, and what do you think is driving the economic growth? Is it the entrepreneurial activity? Is it so largely policy, or some big industry that just hit the right time?
Yeah, so I think a lot of folks associate Vietnam with agriculture, and rightfully so. It's a strength sector of Vietnam's. But actually the largest investor in Vietnam is Samsung, right? And almost 1 out of every 3 phones are assembled in Vietnam. About 1/3 of Samsung's global workforce is located in Vietnam. So Vietnam's really been trying to move up the value chain from this low-wage manufacturing base, which they have benefited from tremendously. And that's been a driver of growth over the last 30 years, is that change from agrarian society to manufacturing. The challenge with that, though, going forward is that's not a sustainable competitive advantage, right? Multinationals will go to wherever there are lower wages due to labor arbitrage, right? So that means next door, for example, in Cambodia or Laos, perhaps Myanmar. And even I know of some firms that are transitioning their textiles operations from Bangladesh to places in Africa, right? So that's going to be perhaps the next frontier. So that means that Vietnam has to move up the value chain within a diminishing window. And also, Vietnam is not immune to the effects of automation technologies or outsourcing, right? These are technologies that don't know any boundaries. And already China is the world's largest market for industrial robots. It's growing the fastest, right? And so, if there is an advantage for Chinese firms to be using robots to produce things, it doesn't really bode so well for Vietnam. There is short-term opportunity. So manufacturing that has traditionally gone to China is now coming to Vietnam, and IT outsourcing, which has traditionally gone to India, is coming to Vietnam as well. In 2015, Cushman & Wakefield said that Vietnam was the top emerging destination for IT outsourcing, right? So that's in a good position to be in order to develop these kinds of outsourcing or automation technologies as well.
So now moving on to the startups in Vietnam.
Yes.
What are your favorite startups in Vietnam right now?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about startups or the startup scene in Vietnam, we're really talking about three major cities, right? So you have Hanoi, which is the capital. It's the political and cultural center of Vietnam. It's a 1,000-year-old city. And then in the south, you have Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, which is the economic powerhouse of the country. And almost directly in the middle, you have Da Nang. Right? So all three cities have different strengths, and they also have different challenges. So, Hanoi, of course, you have the seat of government there. There are about 80 missions, so the diplomatic community has a stronger presence in Hanoi. It's closer to China, of which there are many Chinese imports that come in through the north. And there's a lot of, I think, low-key technical talent that's busy building products. In Saigon, the folks there are more consumer-oriented, so they're more in tune with marketing. They know how to promote things better. They're more entrepreneurial in some senses. And it's the largest city in Vietnam. It'll become Vietnam's first mega city, a city that has 10 million or more people. And in Da Nang, Da Nang's my favorite city, so I'm biased, but I think it's got physical qualities that neither Hanoi nor Saigon have. So it's got this beautiful coastline. It's got a pretty high quality of life, a low cost of living, friendly folks, and fresh air, which might sound strange, but pollution is a real concern that's increasing, especially in Hanoi, but also in Saigon as well.
So what's your favorite startup out of Da Nang, and maybe from the other cities too, like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh?
Yeah, so part of the reason why I'm interested in moving to Da Nang is because although I visited Da Nang, I'm still not as familiar with the city as I am with Hanoi or Saigon. And so I think Da Nang has a lot of potential to develop into an innovation hub within Vietnam. And I want to spend some time there to check it out and see if that could come to fruition. In terms of startups that I like, there's a team called Ephisto in Saigon. And so what they've done is they've tapped into local handicraft makers, right? So folks who are producing shoes or wallets or purses, and they match them with a buyer in the West. So in Europe and also here in the US. And I like the fact that they've taken an ethical approach to sourcing these goods in Vietnam, which these crafts makers are continuing a long and storied tradition in Vietnam. And it's good to see that there are efforts to preserve that and also share that with the world. I also like another startup called Shutta, which what they do is they develop technology which allows you to pull photographs from video. So you can take a video and at that point pull still images from the video. And it looks like you took a photo from it. What they've been experimenting with, and quite successfully, is issuing missions to their community, right? So if you're a brand and you need to get some stock photography, instead of licensing it and paying a premium on it, you can issue this mission to the community that they've developed. And what ends up happening is you have all this crowdsourced content that comes in to fulfill this mission, and the brand can just pick and choose the best images to then lay on copy and create an advertisement around this image. So they're in some ways disrupting the ad agency industry. And then in Hanoi, because I've mentioned 2 startups in Saigon, in Hanoi I like Pay, which is a fintech, a financial technology company. And what they've done is they've pioneered a way to top up your phone digitally. So the standard way to top up your phone in Vietnam is to you go out and buy a scratch card, you scratch it off, you type in the number, and then you get like 20,000 dong or 100,000 dong on your mobile credit. They've taken that process and they've digitized it. Not only that, but you can also get a 20% bonus, or you can get another kind of bonus via one of their partners in F&B, food and beverage industry, or in another sort of retail business that makes sense for their fit. And so they've been one of the more successful fintech companies. They raised a seed round from Capti Ventures, and then just raised from Gobi Partners recently. So they're expanding outside of Vietnam, which I think we'll see more and more startups do.
So yeah, speaking of expanding, what's the biggest startup right now in Vietnam, or who's the success story, and what do they do?
This is quite a timely week for an event on Vietnam, because this week, yesterday, you might have read that the Prime Minister of Vietnam, Nguyen Xuan Phuc, met with President Donald Trump, and they discussed the U.S.-Vietnamese relationship. But the day before, in New York actually, the Prime Minister of Vietnam joined the CEO of V&G, which used to be called Vinagame. And at that meeting, they met with representatives from NASDAQ. And the CEO of V&G, Lê Hồng Minh, announced the company's intention to IPO on NASDAQ, which would be the first Vietnamese company to do that. So this was a watershed moment, having a homegrown Vietnamese company attempting to IPO on a US stock exchange. And that'll actually happen in a year or two. There's still some time that they have to go through all the due diligence and stuff and regulations. But it's been a long journey for them, because they were incorporated in 2004, right? And it's 2017. They're what you would consider sort of like a Google of Vietnam, although previously they might have been considered more like Zynga of Vietnam. So they first started in gaming, and they would take Chinese games and localize them in Vietnam, or they would license the intellectual property and localize it in Vietnam. And that proved to be a very profitable business model. This year, their revenue is projected to be $180 million US, which is an increase of 70% from last year. And so I think there's a lot of national pride around this one company getting as far as they have, and I think everyone's pulling for them to succeed. The interesting thing about V&G, though, is they are considered to be the first unicorn or startup valued at $1 billion or more in Southeast Asia. And they're the only one in Vietnam currently that has that status. It'll be interesting to see what business models future startups might take on or explore as they also try and aim for similar valuations. I think it'll be largely a regional play or international play, which V&G hasn't been so successful at, which makes their success even more unique because it's kind of limited to Vietnam.
I guess what people might not realize is that Vietnam has 100 million people, and Southeast Asia has around 700 million people, so twice the US. So even succeeding in the local market is huge.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So, you know, at some point in the next decade, Vietnam will cross that 100 million person threshold. And that's as ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, crosses the 700 million mark as well. So there's incredible opportunity from a population perspective. And Vietnam produces about 1 million babies every year, right? That's, you know, quite an accomplishment, I'd say.
Must be the frog legs.
Yeah, it's the frog legs, that's for sure.
One thing that's interesting that you mentioned is that you said VNG started as a gaming company, and you know, they're more of a Zynga, and they've evolved, and I know they have like several product lines, and that's something that's actually quite common in emerging markets. Like a lot of startups, you know, compared to here in the US, where like Handy will just stick to like one service, is that a lot of the startups have like several business lines, but also you have what you call like a venture builder, which is not as common here in the US. Can you just speak more about that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the trends that has been developing in Vietnam is venture building. And so what's one example is, let's say a venture capital firm invests in a startup, $500,000 US. About half of that goes to technology credits. And the technology credits are applied to engineers who have been vetted by the venture capital firm, right? So they're always constantly looking for the best talent to bring in-house, and then they also help the engineers transition to one of their portfolio companies. And so it really helps to reduce risk in the VC process. There's a company called NFQ Asia. Locally, they're known as 8-Bit Rockstars, and they've sort of been one of the pioneers of this model in Vietnam. And another example would be an IT outsourcing firm that has extra capacity among their workers to focus on concepts that are either internal to their company, or they'll bring in a product designer, somebody who has an existing concept, and help build it out using their internal resources. And then there's another concept of venture building, which is basically taking your own employees and saying to them, okay, we have a fund to invest in your efforts, and we're going to build them out internally, which FPT has done. So in 2015, they announced that they had a $3 million fund to pursue Entrepreneurship, which is entrepreneurship but internally, corporate structure. And they have actually been one of the pioneering IT firms in Vietnam. So FPT was founded in 1988 under the name Food Processing Technology. In the early 90s, they changed that name to Financing and Promoting Technology, right? After they saw where the future was going. And they have been, I think, one of the success stories in Vietnam in terms of IT outsourcing and technology. Their retail subsidiary is Apple's official distributor in Vietnam. And they're active in about 10 countries around the world. And they captured about 20% of Vietnam's total IT outsourcing market in 2014, 2015. So they're, I think, well poised to continue to benefit in the future under their chairman, Chung Sa-Vinh.
And I think even as startup activity in Southeast Asia is increasing, there's still so much opportunity and white space. So for people here that might be thinking of moving to Southeast Asia and like Vietnam specifically, what do you think are like the big opportunities for someone who wants to go back and start a company, or what kind of startups do you want to see built that is not being built right now?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Carmen. I think when people hear the word Vietnam, perhaps they don't think of startups first or innovation first. But that perception will change slowly, but surely. In Vietnam, there's just massive interest around building things, creating things, or being a part of that experience. And I think in some ways it can be infectious. It really depends, what your aim is when you go to Vietnam. Excuse me. And what I mean by that is, my experience in Vietnam is not necessarily representative of every experience in Vietnam. Part of that is because I'm not Vietnamese. I don't have any historical ties to Vietnam. And not everyone has that same experience. So we have a lot of members of the diaspora here in the US, around 2 million, half of which are in California. And actually I just got back from California. We were talking about ways to focus or direct a lot of the energies of the entrepreneurs and efforts into areas where Vietnam has a natural advantage. That was part of the New Vietnam Studies Initiative at University of California, Davis. And so, take into account regional and global trends to figure out what Vietnamese firms and what Vietnamese entrepreneurs should be investing in or exploring in terms of taking opportunities of the future. So that's one experience. I think if you're a member of the diaspora, some of it could be similar, some of it could not be. I think there are higher expectations for members of the diaspora when they are in Vietnam, right? So no one expects me to speak Vietnamese. No one expects me to understand the cultural rituals or the nuances or the intricacies. If you're coming with a Vietnamese name and you look Vietnamese, people are going to assume you're Vietnamese and engage you like that. So that's something to keep in mind, depending on what your goal is in Vietnam and where you're coming from as well. I think Vietnam, in the startup context, is a great place to start something, and that has been the feedback from folks who I've talked to as well. It's really a place where you can build out a prototype at a far less cost than you would here or in San Francisco. So you can extend your burn rate. Of course, I mentioned the engineering output is great, although you have to do some exploring to find the right team, find the right people to actually execute the vision. But I see Vietnam in the future as a place for entrepreneurs, doesn't matter where they're from, to go to and to build out their minimum viable product or their prototype, and then go back to wherever they came from to continue, or use Vietnam as a launch pad into the region, into ASEAN. So the economics make sense when you look at the cost of living in a place like San Francisco compared to the cost of living in Vietnam. I have a buddy in San Francisco, and he told me, I raised X amount, I'm down to 300,000 US. How long would that last me in Vietnam? And I started laughing. I said, years. That would last you years in Vietnam. I'm not kidding about that, right? So your dollar goes much further. So really you're extending your runway, doubling it perhaps, if you just pick up and move to Vietnam. And there are teams that have done that. They've either come to Vietnam, built it out themselves, or they've come to Vietnam and they've found outsourcing partners to do it. So yeah, I think any way you slice it, it's a great opportunity to spend some time and just really develop your craft.
What about people that just want to work there or do remote work, see a trend of people like living the nomadic lifestyle, and normally you hear of Bangkok or Bali. What about Vietnam? Do you need to speak Vietnamese?
Yeah, so I don't know if on the face of it, Vietnam is as accessible for remote workers. When you're a tourist in Thailand, it's a very different experience than being a tourist in Vietnam, for example. And that's evidenced by the return rate in tourists to Vietnam. It's something like 90% of first-time tourists, 5% go back, and a much larger percentage return to Thailand. But Thailand's had much more experience in developing their tourist industry and so on and so forth. That being said, we have had formal programs of remote workers come to Vietnam. So Remote Year, which I'm not sure if anyone's heard of it, Remote Year has come to Vietnam twice. And actually some folks from the first time that Remote Year came, which was in 2015, I believe, they stayed back, or they came back and attempted to execute their own startup. So there's a guy named Peter Petraka, and he founded Chameleon City. And so the mission of Chameleon City is to help expats settle into Vietnam, because he saw some of the challenges, and once he figured out the process, he basically tried to automate it. He's coming here July 1st, actually, to New York. So I think that's one of the benefits for remote workers is, they have a chance to interact with the local workforce and perhaps update them on best practices, and also, if they're interested, actually take a pause and build something there, either for the market or for another market as well. Oh, sorry, so I didn't answer your question about English. The English language comprehension is varied across Vietnam. So it's much more developed in the south. Like in Saigon, people are going to talk to you in English, and they're probably going to understand you. It's a bit more difficult in Hanoi. Folks there, although they probably have the same or similar interest in learning English, the accent is a bit harder to understand. So I'd say probably the most return on investment in learning Vietnamese would be the time that you save interacting with folks. And also, it accelerates building relationships as well. Right? So speaking the language, or knowledge of the culture, geography, or alcohol, right? That's a great equalizer.
So if, to those of us that are planning to go there, can you give us some tips, some maybe Vietnamese phrases that would help us?
Yeah, so
some must-learn words.
Well, I think if you're going to come to Vietnam, you better bring your drinking shoes, first of all, because it's in the top 10 most consumption of alcohol in the world. And so, there's a lot of drinking that goes on in Vietnam. So in that theme, cheers, right? So yo is a pretty...
Wait, it's yo?
Yeah, just yo! And there are kind of animated ways to say it. So you can say "Một hai ba yo, hai ba hoan," which is 1, 2, 3, cheers, 2, 3, cheers, 2, 3, drink. Or chúc sức khỏe, right? You can like cheers to health, that sort of thing. And then like thank you, cảm ơn. That's a pretty staple vocabulary word in any language, I'd say. But yeah, I mean, you should also be aware, if you attempt to learn a language, where you are in the country. So it's quite different in the north and in the south. And I think probably the simplest way to explain it is the G's, the D's, and the R's in the north are pronounced with a Z or a Z sound. And the G's, the D's, and the R's in the south are pronounced with a Y sound, except for the R. and it's, so you can very clearly tell where someone is or is not from, almost instantly. And folks might not understand you. Like when I'm in Hanoi, I have a much easier time communicating there than when I go down south. I have some trouble with the communication there. Yeah.
Right, so I'm sure you guys have a lot more questions, but I think we should buy his book.
It's not happening. Thank you.
But yeah, we're gonna wait for a year or so. But for my last question, and this is probably the most important question, what's your favorite Vietnam restaurant here in the city? Which one should we check out and what should we order?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'd have to say Madame Vo is a great place to eat Vietnamese food. I've been there myself, and I had the bún bò Huế, which was delicious. So I recommend.
What's it made of?
Bún bò Huế?
Yeah.
It's a soup that has noodles and beef. It's a big bowl. And it has some garnishings. And it's delicious. It's made of deliciousness, I should say. Yeah, but yeah, check it out, Madame Vo, and it's a fairly new restaurant here in New York.
All right. Thank you, Andrew.
Sure. My pleasure.
The startup community there, the startup ecosystem is like hopping. And so this is a very interesting topic, and I'm sure there'll be more of these kind of things. And I think it's really wonderful that Carmen and everybody else is trying to put this together and launch Startup Southeast Asia. Good luck.
No, I found this program very interesting, and it's great that there's such a focus here on Southeast Asian entrepreneurship and startups. I didn't realize this existed in New York, but it's very interesting to know that it does.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to follow Startup Southeast Asia on social and learn about our future events as we talk about tech in Southeast Asia.